Mr. President, another gun massacre, horrible circumstances. I know you came to the floor earlier today to say a word about your feelings and the feelings of your family. They're shared by all of us. It is heartbreaking to think that some person so demented, so unusual would come into a worship setting and kill innocent people. This man, the reported shooter, Devin Kelly, used an assault rifle to kill 26 people in Sutherland Springs, Texas, wounding 20 others. The victims ranged in age from 18 months to 77 years. And about a dozen of those who were killed were children. They included the daughter of the church's pastor. The shooter reportedly drove up to the church wearing a bulletproof vest, tactical gear, and began firing in the parking lot before entering the church. At some point, a local resident who lived near the church began firing back, and the shooter then drove off with two residents in pursuit. Eventually crashing his car, he was found dead of a gunshot wound that may have been self-inflicted. Now, President Trump and others have said that this exchange of fire with citizens responding saved lives and shows that the policy response to the shooting should be to arm more good guys with guns. Let us not forget that 46 people were shot before these citizens came on the scene. Now, this reported shooter, 26 years old, had served in the U.S. Air Force from 2010 until 2014, working on logistics readiness. 2012, he was court-martialed for 2 counts of assault on his then-wife and child. He was sentenced to confinement for 12 months. He received a bad conduct discharge in 2014, remarried in 2014, and had worked as an unarmed security guard at a water park. He reportedly bought 4 guns, 1 each from 2014 to 2017. 3 of those weapons, the assault rifle, which he used in this crime, and 2 handguns were found at the scene. Local law enforcement said that the shooter was likely motivated by a domestic situation. His wife's grandmother was one of the victims. There's so many things that come to mind, and first and foremost is the grief that we all feel and sorrow for the families that were affected. It is so sad that when people go to church on Sunday, they are not safe from this gun violence and gun massacres that are occurring way too frequently across the United States. There are things that we need to do, and only we can do in Congress, to make the laws better and safer. I respect the Second Amendment. I respect the fact that there are men and women in my family, friends, people I represent across Illinois who own guns and use them safely and responsibly. We have sportsmen and hunters in my family. We have people who buy guns for sporting purposes, for self-defense. They store the guns carefully and safely. They take it very seriously that they are dealing with a deadly weapon. They don't want anyone innocent to be hurt. I respect that very much. I think we all should. But I also call on them now. They need to lead us into a more sensible policy when it comes to gun safety. The owners of firearms, overwhelmingly, when they're asked, believe that we should have comprehensive background checks to keep guns out of the hands of those who misuse them. Overwhelmingly, a majority of gun owners feel that way, as most Americans feel. Why can't we do that? We certainly know that it's within our power. In my state of Illinois, city of Chicago, we've reached 600 gun deaths this weekend for the year, 600. It is the highest number in over a decade. It's heartbreaking, and that doesn't include those who were injured by being shot as well. Where are these guns coming from? You cannot have a gun store in the city of Chicago, that's true, but when it comes to purchasing guns, it makes no difference. The suburbs have plenty of gun dealers, and of course, there are gun shows in neighboring states like Indiana. We also know that at these gun stores, which are in the suburbs of Chicago, they supply 25% of the identified crime guns. And we know many of those are sold in what's known as a straw purchase, sold to someone who could not legally qualify to buy a gun, but buys buys one for someone who's not legally qualified, a girlfriend or someone who buys a gun because she has no criminal record so her boyfriend can use it, misuse it, kill innocent people. Can't we toughen that law and make it a law where there's real penalties for straw purchases? That's not going to slow down any legitimate gun owner or anyone who wants to use a gun in a responsible fashion. That's one thing we can do. And the gun show loophole. We know that at Columbine and other places, it was a gun show loophole that opened the way for the purchase of guns which killed innocent people. Let's do something about that. We should. If we're serious, we should. We also know that we have prohibitions in the 1996 Lautenberg Amendment prohibiting convicted domestic abusers from buying or possessing guns. That applies as well to military personnel. Questions need to be asked and answered about this shooter in Texas and what happened after he was court-martialed for domestic abuse in the Air Force in 2012. How did he purchase a gun after that in violation of the Lautenberg Amendment? We need to also ask why in the world anyone needs to own an assault weapon. I understand people who buy rifles, shotguns, and even handguns for sporting and self-defense, but why does anyone need to own a military-style weapon, one that can be converted, as we found in Las Vegas, to a weapon that discharges 100 rounds in 7 seconds? That is totally unnecessary for any legitimate legal purpose. It is available perhaps for military use, perhaps for law enforcement, but not for the ordinary American citizen who would purchase and own a gun for legitimate purposes. Next, we need to make sure that we understand why this gun violence is growing in America. The number of people who have been killed, injured, just grows by the year. It's getting worse. We need to also talk about the issue of mental health raised by the president in response to this tragedy in Texas. The president said, quote, "This isn't a gun situation. I think that mental health is your problem here," end of quote. Despite the fact that most violence in the United States has nothing to do with mental illness, many are arguing that mental health is really the issue. What have we done in the United States Senate when it comes to mental health and guns this year? We used the CRA to repeal a regulation that directed the Social Security Administration to share mental illness information with the background check compilation of information. There was an advocacy for massive cuts to Medicaid, which would throw millions of people with mental health needs off coverage. There was an attempt to repeal the Affordable Care Act that would have allowed insurers to refuse coverage of essential health benefits, including mental health treatment. And there was a refusal to provide additional federal funding to help provide mental health care. We don't have a very good record this year in the Senate when it comes to taking mental illness seriously, and we should. We also need to make sure that we introduce a bill, which I'm working on, to encourage more crime gun tracing in light of last week's crime gun trace report from the Chicago Police Department. Mr. President, we focus on terrorism and what it does to our country, and we should. That's our responsibility. Anyone, as in 9/11, who would do harm to innocent Americans, killing 3,000 in that particular instance, needs to be taken extremely seriously by all of us in Congress and in the White House. Foreign sources of terrorism need to be carefully watched when it comes to our border security, when it comes to background checks and the like. But let's be honest, more Americans are dying from Americans killing Americans with guns than by terrorist activity. It is just as much a death as any foreign terrorist threat would be. And we need to consider it just as seriously as we do when it comes to the issues of terrorism and safety for the people of America. Why doesn't the United States Congress take this up? Why don't we even have a debate? I'm on the Senate Judiciary Committee. We've not had a single bill this year that addresses gun safety, not one, despite the gun violence that takes place every day and despite tragedies like this tragedy over the weekend at Sutherland Springs, Texas.